Now the Ryzen 5 3600 is a 3.6 gigahertz. Wow, what is gigahertz? Now the Ryzen 5 3600 is a. I gotta stop laughing so I can get through this. Ugh. What up, techies and gamers? It's your boy Jermaine with Tech Toys and Gaming. Welcome to my channel if it's your first time, and welcome back to all of those guys who have been stalking me for the 50,000th time. Stop stalking, subscribe. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about something I did recently. I went ahead and upgraded my Ryzen 5 3600 to a Ryzen 5 5600X because I just felt like I needed to. Why? What? So the main three reasons I decided to upgrade, and probably a reason you might want to upgrade, is one, thermals. My thermals took a deep dive once I upgraded my graphics card to a 3080 RTX. It's simply because the size of the graphics card was enormous, so it basically congested that little tiny case. I basically had to remove the side panels, the side glass panels, in order for it to breathe better. And even then, I was reaching pretty high temperatures, 85, 95 at some points, 95 degrees Celsius, so pretty hot, techies and gamers. So had to switch out the case as well as the actual air cooler to liquid cooling. And number two, I was looking to go ahead and shoot for the stars. I wanted to 4K game, and that's what I'm doing now. And number three, I wanted to improve the overall aesthetics of it, the beautiful look of it, and a part of that was reducing the CPU fan noise output that it was producing due to the overall heat increase, and installing a cool liquid cooler to improve the aesthetics as well. For this video, I'm going to go ahead and show the bump in performance that took place once I went ahead and upgraded my PC with these new components, techies and gamers. Upgraded the CPU because of some minor bottlenecking I was getting with the Ryzen 5 3600 with the 3080 Eagle, especially when I was trying to go ahead and go over to 4K gaming. Then you started to see that more or less. I didn't only upgrade my Ryzen 5 3600, I also upgraded my memory to 32 gigs of RAM, 3600 megahertz. That's right, from 2000 to 3600. I upgraded my power supply. I went with a mini power supply, small form factor, 850 watts, gold, techies and gamers. I upgraded my Ryzen Tech super tiny ITX, the smallest form factor they had, to the Fantex Eclipse P200A, and I upgraded my air cooling to liquid cooling. I bought this cool little nifty dark flash. So starting with the Ryzen 5 3600, the temperatures were ridiculous, actually, techies and gamers. Running idle, I would find that sometimes I'd run up to about 45 degrees Celsius, give or take, but with nothing running, there should be no reason why I'm running at 45 degrees Celsius. There were no background processes taking place, no antivirus scans, nothing running. I should be running in the 30s or very low 40s, but 45, and as soon as I open a browser, I'm up in the 50s, 55, and I'm doing really nothing. So already warning number one, when I took out my 1660 Super and I slapped in a 3080 RTX graphics card, that's when the pain and the heat started to rise, techies and gamers. And yeah, not only that, but my CPU cooler fans were really starting to ramp up and making a lot of noise. For my CPU in the smaller build, I was actually using the Master Cooler G100M. Now, this was actually a pretty good cooler running with the 1660 Super. At best, the noise was mediocre. However, once I slapped in that 3080, that's when the noise started to ramp up and the fan started to spin faster, obviously because the heat in the case itself was starting to build up. There was really no space for it to breathe, techies and gamers. So yeah, I introduced a problem once I started to go bigger and go harder. Now, both of these processors are 6-core 12-thread processors. However, they are of two totally different, mostly different architectures, with the Zen 3 being a little bit more advanced in terms of communication at the core of its processing, right? Now, the Ryzen 5 3600 is a 3.6 gigahertz Wow. What is a giggle horror? Somebody in the comments tell me. No, don't even write that in the comments. What is a giggle horror? I gotta stop laughing so I can get through this. Now, the Ryzen 5 3600 is a... Now, the Ryzen 5 3600 is a 6-core... Now, the Ryzen 5 3600 is a 6-core, 12-thread processor. You can actually overclock this to 4.0, 4.1 gigahertz at best, maybe 4.2. I wouldn't go ahead and push it that much unless you got some really good cooling going on your machine, but otherwise, I would just bump it up to about 4.1 max. Now, the Ryzen 5 3600 comes in with a 1,225 points on the single core score, pushing it just above the Core i9 and right below the Core i7 7700K. Techies and gamers, not too bad for a single core score on a Ryzen 5. And on the multi-score points, you're getting about 8,700 points, give or take, putting it right below the 1700 Ryzen 7 8-core. So there's barely any difference there, very negligible. With regards to the differences between the multi-core with the Ryzen 7 1700X and the Ryzen 5 3600. Maybe a frame or two difference, nothing to really sneeze about. But also bear in mind that that Ryzen 7 is a 8-core 16 multi-thread processor. So yeah, looking at the Ryzen 5 5600X, you'll see that the single core score is at 1459 points, bumping it right above the 11th gen Core i7 1165. Techies and gamers, that is pretty impressive coming in with a single core score that high. Jumping over to the multi-thread, you will have yourself a nice whopping 9,696 points on that multi-score test, and that throws it right below the Ryzen Threadripper. Now granted, that is nearly double the speed of the Ryzen 5 5600X, but notice how much it is above the actual Intel Core i9 9800. Techies and gamers, now that is not a CPU to sneeze at either, and this Ryzen 5 5600X is kind of jumping past that on the multi-score. Techies and gamers, don't sneeze at that either. Stop sneezing, everyone's sick. What? Switching it over to the Ryzen 5 5600X, I was finding that my temperatures were actually a lot lower. When comparing, there's about a 10 degrees or so Celsius difference. And what you're seeing here is both processors running idle with only OBS doing this recording. Now, with the Ryzen 5 3600 in its old case with the RTX 3080, with the air cooling fan for the CPU, running games at 1920 at highest frame rates, as much as I could get anyway with the highest detail, my core temps were definitely getting up in the 80, 85-ish Celsius. That is too close for comfort for me. When I start delving into the 90s, there were some games I played like Destiny, for example, a few other titles that actually pushed my my temperatures way up to 90 degrees Celsius. Techies and gamers, running those games as well as other newer titles on the 5600X in the new machine, the new build with the liquid cooling and the RTX 3080, my CPU temps were not going above 60 degrees Celsius, running at 1920 1080 at 120 frames locked VSync to my monitor here. I was not getting over 60 degrees Celsius, techies and gamers, at the highest graphics I can possibly push it. So talk about smoothness and the change in performance. That already kind of just blew my mind. Taking Anthem a step further, I went ahead and jumped it into 4K resolution. Techies and gamers, that's right, 4K 60 FPS VSync locked to my OLED TV. And looking at the performance here, you will see that it stays at a really good steady 60 FPS. Now, I will say that that is due to the RTX 3080 mostly. This is somewhat CPU bound, not too much, but mostly graphics card bound. And you will see that I am probably jumping roughly up into the 80 percentile, maybe 90, scathing it, depending on what's going on in the game, utilizing the RTX 3080. And my CPU usage roughly at around 30 to 50 percentile usage, depending on what's happening in the game. Again, in terms of gameplay performance, obviously there is a vast difference as well in terms of frame rates, as well as how hot the actual CPU is running while we're running these at 1920 max graphics, highest details, as well as running it at 4K, Tech Easy Gamers. So yeah, 4K is where the game has totally changed between these two builds altogether. Now, the noise. Now, the new machine, let's just get straight to it, is much quieter using that liquid cooling, Tech Easy Gamers. Once I popped out that master cooler, CPU cooler, and threw in the liquid cooling, my sounds have dropped dramatically. So right here, what you're listening to is the audio with the master cooler, CPU fan cooler. Shh. And making a switch over to my liquid cooling entire build audio. Here it goes. Shh. And last but not least, it just looks prettier to me, Techies and Gamers, especially with that nice liquid cooling CPU cooler RGB going, with my RGB fans running, everything running via Aura Sync. I am loving this new build, Techies and Gamers. So if you are in the market for upgrading your PC with these particular components coming from essentially what I came from, considering the size of the actual case, bumping up your processor, bumping up your RAM, I would say make the jump, Techies and Gamers, especially if you already have the machine 3/4 of the way built. You might as well invest in the Ryzen 5 5600. Is quite a decent gaming processor. There's not a lot I can throw at it that it pretty much can't handle. And if I wanted to actually upgrade my processor in the near future, my B450i can actually take a Ryzen 7. If they have a Zen 3 Ryzen 7 that comes up, this board is ready for action. I got it at a pretty good steal, less than $200, Techies and Gamers, for a pretty awesome processor, mid-range processor. So do I recommend it? Absolutely, Techies and Gamers. If you're looking to utilize some of these components, check the link in the description. I have a lot of those parts and some of the videos that you might want to see where I actually built it in the description, Techies and Gamers. And with that said, I appreciate you stopping by, checking out this video, listening to me rant and boast about how awesome my PC is now. And as usual, I'll see you in my next review, my next video, my next humble brag, kind of what I did here. What? And stay safe, stay close, and stay bred. What? Breeding? Who's breeding?